This is Darlene. Her bone density started getting worse fast after beating cancer. This is actually very common after chemotherapy and radiation. In fact, for two tests in a row, her bone density kept declining, both in her hip as well as her spine. And at that point, things were heading in a very predictable direction. Worse bone density, higher fracture risk, and eventually medications. Now, here's where things get interesting. After two consecutive tests showing decline, Darlene went for her third bone density scan, and her oncologist was completely shocked. Her hip bone density stopped declining, and her spine, it actually improved, which is almost never happens in cases like hers. So what exactly did we do with her to get these kinds of results? Well, Darlene is an actual, real life personal training client of mine. So here is her exercise program. Exactly. We start her off with a warm up, which is not specifically directed at bone density. This just prepares her for the exercise coming up that's going to improve her bone density. So we just had her start with doing with 5 to 10 minutes on the cardio machine of her choice, which usually was a treadmill, as well as 10 front leg swings and 10 lateral leg swings. In addition to that, again, before we got into the actual exercises that would have improved her bone density, she had some couple of rotator cuff issues, lower back issues. So we did something called band pull aparts, which would strengthen her rotator cuff and improve her range of motion around the shoulders. And she also had some lower back pain going into it, so we did some exercises to improve that lower back pain. Both were done for two sets of 30 seconds. And then we finally got to the exercises that truly mattered for her bone density. We started her off with three sets of 5 to 7 repetitions with a 4-0-x-0 tempo. What that means, the 4 is the amount of time, the number of seconds she spent lowering the weight. The 0 is the gap between lowering and raising. X is the raising, which means explosive. And 0 is the gap between raising and lowering. In other words, we wanted her to lift the weight explosively and lower it slowly. And the exercises that we actually had her doing were things like back squats, as well as a push press, which is an exercise. It looks like a shoulder exercise, but it's not. It's more of a leg exercise assisted by the shoulders. Uh, in addition to that, we had her doing reverse hypers as well as seated rows. There are always reasons for exercise selection, and we'll get to that in a second. Basically, we want to target the muscles that attach to the bones with the worst T-scores. So we also had her doing something called glute ham raises, back extensions, and face pulls. So again, why these exercises? Because more weight equals a stronger bone stimulus. And again, the secret is the tempo, the 40x0 tempo. As I talk about in my other videos, which you can find on my channel, um, one very, very important variable that isn't really that important for other things, but it is for bone density, is the tempo. If a person lifts a weight explosively, that bone is more likely to get stronger. And of course, impact is number one. But again, exercise selection is key. There is something called Wolff's Law, which states that bones only get stronger at the very spot where muscles pull on them. In other words, if one of the quadriceps muscles, the thigh muscles, attaches onto a small part of the thigh bone, only that small part of the thigh bone gets stronger, not the entire thigh bone. And so that's why we had her doing deadlifts, because it's good for the T scores of the lumbar spine, the total hip, and the femoral leg, all of the above. And so, why is impact effective? Well, let's look at what the research has to say. Here's one meta analysis titled Effects of Different Impact Exercise Modalities on Bone Mineral Density in Premenopausal Women. And here's another one titled A Meta Analysis of Impact Exercise on Postmenopausal Bone Loss, the case for mixed loading exercise programs. And basically, um, jumping is very effective. Unfortunately, because Darlene had knee issues, jumping was out of the picture. So instead, we had her doing the jumping replacement exercises like the push press that you saw earlier and another thing called a clean jerk. Now, of course, every program is different. We, again, exercise selection is very important because we want to target the exercises to where the bone density is lacking. If somebody has strong bones in one area and weak bones in a different area, we want to do more exercises for the areas with weak bones. We also want to adjust the program to any injuries a person has. Again, Darlene at the time had rotator cuff issues as well as bad knees. So jumping was out for her, but that didn't mean she couldn't improve her bone density. It just meant that she needed a different approach. We also have to accommodate for other chronic conditions. Does somebody have osteoporosis and arthritis? Does somebody have osteoporosis and thyroid issues or parathyroid issues? Um, Also, how severe is the bone deterioration as well as a person's starting strength levels? Obviously, if they're starting at a very low strength level, we're not going to have them lift a very heavy weight to begin with. Maybe a light weight is heavy for them. So, despite her getting such really, really good progress, what could have been better for Darlene? Well, nothing is ever optimal. And even with a suboptimal approach, she was able to improve her bone density. So Darlene is an avid golfer, and for better or for worse, she prioritizes golfing over her bones. So during the summers, her exercise frequency would decrease from 2 or 3 times per week down to once a week. So obviously, it's not as effective as 2 or 3 times per week. Additionally, she enjoys doing fitness classes and jogging in between strength training workouts. Again, in my view, this wasn't appropriate given that she had osteoporosis and this is just for fun. However, she's an adult, she can make her own decisions, and she prioritized the fitness classes that don't improve her bone density over purposeful activity that does improve her bone density because the fitness classes made her a bit more tired for strength training. Um, she couldn't put in the necessary effort to lift the same heavy weights as when she was fresh. Now, here's why conventional advice for osteoporosis is wrong. Walking simply isn't enough. Things like doing cardio at best maintain bone density and at worst slow down the decline, which means there's still a decline. So bones respond to specific stimuli, and walking is not that stimulus. If you walk and you just get better at walking, you're able to walk further. Walking is not the stimulus for stronger bones. Walking is the stimulus for better endurance. What is the stimulus for stronger bones is progressively heavier weights over time. In other words, if you have osteoporosis and you lift those progressively heavier weights, you'll have stronger bones on the other end of it. However, if you have osteoporosis and you walk, you still have osteoporosis. Probably worse osteoporosis, just not as bad as if you were completely sedentary. My name is Igor. I help adults over 50 improve bone density naturally and without medications. If you want to dive much deeper into this, into the exercise, nutrition, and supplementation for stronger bones, I've created a very special video titled The Stronger Bones Checklist: 6 Steps to Improve Bone Density Naturally. This video is not available on YouTube. However, it is available for you to download for free at this link on your screen right now or in the description below.